So we're in your American history book. We're in chapter 30, section 1, and we were going over the administration of George W. Bush during this time. We started going over what happened at the beginning of Bush's administration, the terrorist attack on 9/11. And so from that, we were going on how America now is involved in the world against terrorism. So leading the world against terrorism, I should say. So the War on Terror, Operation Enduring Freedom. So President Bush pushed for military response to 9/11, vowing that America would not rest until the terrorists responsible received justice. He said the United States would make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. Pretty important. If they were harboring terrorists, he was going to attack them. So both parties in Congress responded with an overwhelming support and a series of campaigns that became known as the War on Terror. Many combat and support aircraft were quickly sent to bases in the Middle East and Indian Ocean. The first campaign began in Afghanistan called Operation Enduring Freedom, or the Afghanistan War. So here we have Operation Enduring Freedom, picture here, America Fights Back. Operation Enduring Freedom, here's some pictures. We're talking about now it all centered first in Afghanistan. Afghanistan War, Operation Enduring Freedom. So the Bush administration knew Afghanistan had sheltered Osama bin Laden in the past and continued to harbor Al-Qaeda terrorists. So they knew Afghanistan was Al-Qaeda. So they knew that he had been there before. They gave Afghan leaders, which were Islamic leaders, they called them the Taliban. They were called the Taliban. They gave them an ultimatum to surrender the Al-Qaeda terrorists immediately or face military action. So here you have two sets of terrorists. You have the Taliban. The Taliban were in Afghanistan. They were running Afghanistan. And then you have the Al-Qaeda that are hiding out in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, of course, is Osama bin Laden. So the Taliban refused. So when they refuse, you know they must be hiding something, huh? Probably him. So probably they are hiding Osama bin Laden. So the Taliban refused, and the United States and the United Kingdom launched a bombing campaign against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda targets in Afghanistan. So they knew some of the Al-Qaeda targets, they knew some of the Taliban, and they basically started bombing, We started bombing. By January 2002, the United States Air Force controlled the skies above Afghanistan. The Taliban had been deposed. So by January of 2002, which of course is not that long, we think September 11th to January, that we had already controlled the Taliban there. American Special Forces had launched a ground assault then in Afghanistan. On April 2002, President Bush announced aid for a new democratic Afghan government. He basically took over the Taliban government there. And hundreds of Taliban and Al-Qaeda terrorists had been captured or killed. But Osama bin Laden, he went into hiding. He again fled, and they could not find Osama bin Laden. So here we have a picture there. These are all pictures from Afghanistan for this Operation Enduring Freedom. Now, it didn't. We have from 2001 of September to January 2002, a few months, and they had basically overtook Afghanistan through Operation Enduring Freedom. Then on to Operation Iraqi Freedom. So we have other terrorists we're going to be dealing with. The Bush administration turned to another nation known to have harbored and supported terrorists, Iraq. Iraq was governed by the dictator Saddam Hussein. Sound familiar? Remember I said he will be back. His father, the other Bush, when you think of the senior, Bush Senior, H.W. Bush that was president before, in Iraq under Desert Storm, familiar, had allowed, Saddam Hussein to escape, and here he comes back to Iraq. So Iraq came under suspicion when intelligence showed evidence that Iraq was stockpiling weapons of mass destruction. So they have chemical warfare, they have, do they have atomic warfare? What are they using? Stockpiling weapons of mass destruction under Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein had previously used chemical weapons against Iran and against the Kurds, so they knew that he had chemical weapons. That's kind of bad, chemical weapons. And he had killed 25,000 people, mainly Kurds at that time. So they knew that he had weapons and was stockpiling weapons, especially chemical weapons, because he already used them against the Kurds in Iraq. They were another ethnic group. After the Persian Gulf War, United Nations inspectors found and destroyed tons of chemical weapon materials, as well as long-range missiles and chemical warheads. So they knew that is he stockpiling the warheads? Is he stockpiling missiles? Does he have atomic warfare? Does he have the atomic bomb? So President Bush and Congress agreed that Hussein might be aiding terrorists, against America. So maybe Osama bin Laden there too, another thought. But now they had to deal with Saddam Hussein. So here's some pictures of Bush. This is in Iraq, all of these pictures. There's so many pictures if you go online of soldiers in Iraq. Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Iraq War. March 2003 now, we're going into 2003. The White House was convinced that Hussein was holding weapons of mass destruction, so they launched the second campaign of the War on Terror into Iraq. So Operation Iraqi Freedom, or maybe called the Iraq War, and here's the objectives. What were the objectives? So first of all, they wanted to capture al-Qaeda terrorists, especially Saddam Hussein, right? They wanted to, number 2, remove Saddam Hussein from power. Number 3, destroy any weapons of mass destruction. Number 4, uncover any intelligence related to other terrorist networks. Number 5, secure Iraqi oil fields and resources from the threat of terrorist control. Number 6, to establish the Iraqi people a stable self-government. So all of these things. The last one is little, but the self-government comes off. These 5 ones were the main ones at first. So anyway, President Bush Jr., President Bush at this time, really focused in that he really wanted to remove Saddam Hussein because he realized his father had made a mistake in letting him go, He's like, I got to get this done, My dad made a mistake, but I'm not going to make it, maybe. Hussein's regime toppled. So within a month, the United States had toppled Hussein's regime. But the dictator went into hiding again. So he's hiding. Saddam Hussein, probably in the same place. U.S. troops needed to retain order until a new government could be established. Again, we would have to help us establish a government. Their government, being toppled and Saddam Hussein gone, they would need to put forth a new government. So in 2003, closed with the capture, finally they captured Saddam Hussein. So Operation Iraqi Freedom was on a slow road to success. President Bush struggled to bring victory. The mounting number of American and Iraqi casualties and the growing cost of the operation gave a lot of criticism to the plan. So a lot of people were criticizing, like, this is taking too long. And so added was that no weapons of mass destruction had been found. They knew that the weapons were there. What did they do with these weapons of mass destruction? They had transported them to another place. But here's a picture of the statue. Here's Saddam Hussein. He actually will get executed by the Iraqi government then, but we have them pulling down his statue, this gigantic statue. You can see how big the statue is by this serviceman here, American, putting a flag over his face as they could pull. They pulled the statue of Saddam Hussein down as they typified pulling down his regime, right? So here we have, this is in Iraq, some of our soldiers in Iraq. Protests against the Iraqi war. Some of the criticism turned into demonstrations like during the Vietnam War. So Operation Iraqi Freedom brought 10 million people gathered in the streets around the world, creating the largest protest in history. You know, they learned how to protest, right, through the Vietnam, and now they were back protesting in the Iraqi war. The American media fueled much of the war opposition and supported, was supported, of course, by Hollywood entertainers. Don't they always support those protests? Who denounced Bush and his policies on a national level on TV. So Hollywood, a lot of different people like not wanting to go keep this Iraq war going. And so a lot of protesting going in the world and in America, and also being led by a lot of Hollywood entertainers. First free election in Iraq, the Iraqi election. First free election in 50 years. So Saddam Hussein executed. So in January 2005, the efforts of America and Iraqi soldiers resulted in the first free Iraqi election in 50 years. Many walked for miles just to cast their ballots. Although Iraq remained unstable, a great step towards freedom had been made in a free election. The challenge was to deal with the former dictator Saddam Hussein, who had been captured by U.S. troops in 2003. So after standing trial for murdering thousands of Iraqis, Saddam Hussein was executed in 2006 by the new Iraqi government. So here he was captured in 2003, but he wasn't executed till 3 years later in 2006. So he was in captive that many years, 3 years in captivity. So here we have Saddam Hussein. This was his trial, and he was executed. Here we have the Iraqi government being set up, free elections in Iraq here, as you can see. And so still the strive, for Americans in Iraq. Bush continues to support Iraq. Bush stressed the need to continue to support Iraq. He vetoed Congress's efforts to decrease funding for Operation Iraqi Freedom. He said, we need to, here he is in Iraq. He had made multiple times come, to Iraq there. And America ended up putting billions of dollars into the Iraqi war. So here we have pictures in the midst. Iraq being his place, his need to basically as a president and going in there and supporting their government was very important to him and to America after we had finally gone in and freed them of Saddam Hussein. Now we're talking about Israel. So kind of in the midst, we're still in the Middle East. Let's get into what was going on in Israel. Israel was the only state in the Middle East with a healthy representative government. All these others, in fact, of the Arab nations, they did not have healthy representative governments. Israel formed a large part of the war on terror. So she basically was there knowing at any moment that she needed to step in, she would help President Bush. So Israel was, basically Bush was behind all the support in Israel, and Israel was behind President Bush. So President Bush worked closely with the Israeli government to combat terrorism. Not only the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, but also Hezbollah and Hamas are two Palestinian terrorist organizations that hated Israel. All these Islamic terrorist groups, they hate Israel. So the Taliban hated Israel, Al-Qaeda, those were in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? But now we have Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas. Hamas is in Palestine, basically right there in Israel. So we have these, now we have Hezbollah, Hamas, and then we're going to have ISIS. ISIS is going to come in the midst of this. All these different terrorist organizations. And they all hate Israel. So Bush hoped for peace between Israel and a new Palestinian state, but all attempts at his two-state solution were unsuccessful. So he again tried to, appease the Palestinians, bring them in, to have counsel with Israel, but they never worked. So Bush's Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, she was from 2005 to 2009, was the highest ranking Black American woman in the United States as Secretary of State. And she was very vocal about peace in the Middle East, especially in Israel. So Condoleezza Rice, there's a picture of her right there. I like here what Bush says, Israel is our ally in that we've made very strong commitment to support Israel. We will support Israel if her security is threatened. So basically said, if Hamas, if Hezbollah, if the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, any of these groups attack Israel, we will stand behind Israel, he said. So here we have pictures of him. Here's a picture of Bush at the Wailing Wall, where you basically pray at the wall. I wouldn't say kiss the wall, but pray at the wall. So anyway, I was there actually. I've gone there to that wall and prayed at that wall. Okay, now we have another country to be concerned about, Iran. Iran had emerged and was labeled as a state sponsor of terrorism too. So of course, Iran, arch enemies with Israel. And we had already Iran had held American hostages and everything in the past and everything. And so Iran still is this sponsor of terrorism in the world and sponsoring its own terrorism towards Israel and the United States. The major threat was Iran's pursuit of uranium. Uranium. You think of atomic energy, atomic bombs. The major threat was Iran's pursuit of uranium with technology from Russia. So we're thinking, okay, Russia's giving him technology with uranium. We're thinking of atomic bomb, especially Russia. In the Bible, it talks about Iran and Russia coming together in the last times. So especially in Ezekiel 38 and 39, you can read that on your own. Iran said the purpose was for fuel for civilian reactors. They said, oh, we're only using this uranium because we want to use it for fuel. You know better. However, the same technology could be used to create nuclear weapons. President Bush made it clear that the United States would not allow Iran to possess a nuclear weapon, that her uranium enrichment was not acceptable. Like, we do not believe that you are doing this for energy. We believe that you are doing this for weapons. Here's pictures of Iran and weapons. There are weapons in Iran. And being a terrorist, first they're going to want to attack Israel or maybe the United States. And now even having some ties with the weapons coming in from Russia, which is pretty biblical. So anyway, let's talk about the Bush Doctrine. The greatest emphasis of the Bush administration was the foreign policy of the war on terror, of course. So Bush condemned terrorism. He's especially the terrorism that was sponsored by the regimes of Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, which he considered the axis of evil. So basically he thought, put Iran, Iraq, and North Korea together, you got and they are coming together. They haven't come together, but you think he thought this surely was an access of evil because it was full of terrorism. So President Bush proposed preemptive action, waging war on threatening countries before they had a chance to harm America, which became known as the Bush Doctrine. Okay, let's stop there. What is the Bush Doctrine? The Bush Doctrine says that we will take preemptive action, and without waging war on threatening countries, we will wage war on these threatened countries before they have a chance to even harm America. We will deal with them before they even attack America. And this became known as the Bush Doctrine, that we're going to attack. Here's a picture. It says, shoot now and aim later. This is their basically critics were saying that about him. But basically he was saying, we need to deal with them before they come and start attacking America and attacking our cities. But that happened in 9/11. He said, we're looking to get rid of them before they get here. So, logical. The logic was to move against the enemies of freedom on foreign soil rather than waiting for domestic attacks to happen in our country. The Bush Doctrine. Now we have another election coming in 2004. So his first term was just filled with a war on terror, right? So now in 2004, the war on terror still remained the key issue. Democrats now, though, although they were initially supporting the Bush Doctrine, took advantage of its unpopularity to campaign against Bush and Vice President Cheney. So Democrats then nominated John Kerry, and he was born in 1943 and still alive, of Massachusetts. He was a Vietnam War veteran who had voted for the war on terror, but then since had come to oppose the war on terror that Bush had. So other issues were issues of the economy, healthcare costs, taxation, spending, and moral issues such as abortion and homosexuality. These were all issues at the election of 2004. The media projected a victory for Senator Kerry right up to the day of election. Everybody thought, oh, surely Senator Kerry is going to win this election. Bush is getting the point, not as popular as he was. So the winner remained unclear until the afternoon, another really tight election, right? Remember, Bush's first election was so tight that some people think that without Florida, Florida's electoral votes, Bush wouldn't have won. So now they have election day in 2004 with a narrow race, not in Florida this time, but a race in Ohio. And so when Ohio declared victory for Bush, giving him again the majority of electoral votes. So he was way behind until Ohio. Ohio is another one of those swing states, that most presidents looking at Ohio. How is Ohio going to go? How is Florida going to go? So unlike in 2000, Bush also received a majority of popular votes. So remember in the year 2000, he didn't get the popular vote, but he got the electoral vote, so he won. But now he did receive the popular vote. But it still, again, was a tight race. Here we have Bush, 254 electoral votes, Kerry, 242. Pretty close, pretty close. Anyway, so this was the electoral votes as the race was going on here. So, in Ohio's 20 electoral votes gave President Bush his margin, it says here. Without Ohio, he wouldn't have got, his enough votes to become president. Domestic policy and the Supreme Court. Bush appointed 2 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Rehnquist had passed away, and so Bush appointed John G. Roberts Jr., here's a picture of him, who was already a member of the Supreme Court, but now he became Chief Justice. So he appointed him as Chief Justice. He was a conservative. Both of these guys were conservative, and that's why the Democrats, the liberals, were up in arms. They think we have 2 more conservatives on the Supreme Court. So Bush then nominated Samuel A. Alito, and Alito, actually it's Samuel A. Alito Jr., to refill Roberts' seat. There was a fierce battle that ensued as congressional Democrats and the media fought to oppose Alito's nomination on the grounds that he was too conservative, particularly on abortion. He stood against abortion. So it took weeks of debate, but finally the Democrats were unsuccessful, and though they staged a filibuster and everything else to prevent this, but Justice Alito was confirmed in 2006. Here's a picture of Justice Alito. It's kind of weird. They're like, oh, he is against abortion, so we need to get him off of this, and they tried, but they didn't succeed. Same time here, we had hurricanes happening, of course. Despite the hurricane of what happened in the terrorism, we have now hurricanes, physically hurricanes, in the Gulf. So during the months of August and September of 2004, Florida suffered through four hurricanes. But then in August 2005, Hurricane Katrina, you got to know that name, Hurricane Katrina, hit the shores of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So that was the huge hurricane coming into the Gulf. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. New Orleans, Louisiana, or New Orleans, as I say it, which lay below sea level, proved to be totally devastated when levees gave way and flooded the city with over 20 feet of water. So here's the city of New Orleans, basically being flooded with 20 feet of water. New Orleans, they say. New Orleans. That's what they say it in Florida. And anyway, here we see the city being flooded with 20 feet. Here's some other pictures of the flooding of New Orleans. And here we have down here, these are a bunch of animals, I think they're on the roof or that in the boat. So animals needed to be saved too. Here the boats are going by and saving people that were on their roof. So 20 feet of water. Many had been evacuated, but thousands remained trapped by floodwaters. Mobile, Alabama, Gulfport, Mississippi, also had terrible destruction from winds and flooding. So not only did Louisiana, but also Mobile, Alabama, and Gulfport, they were hit hard too. In 2005, the death toll from Katrina stood at 1,300 people, and hundreds were missing. The storm was by far the costliest storm in history, with damages over $100 billion. So we have $100 billion in damage for Hurricane Katrina, and we also have a death toll. 1,300 people died in the flooding in the hurricane, and hundreds were still missing in 2005. So here's another picture up here. You can imagine, so a huge death toll. 1,300 people dying and all these other people missing. That's quite a deal. And $100 billion of damage. High spending. Following 3 tax cuts passed by the Bush in the first term, the tax receipts rose. The federal government failed to curb its spending. Spending went up. As a result, the deficit spending reached $413 billion by the end of Bush's second term, causing the national debt to soar to $9 trillion. So we have the national debt going up. We have Clinton, where it was down really low. We saw that with President Clinton as it went up, and then Bush's tax cuts. You can see a picture has this goes here, but this is the high spending the high spending due to the being in Afghanistan and Iran and the war, and now we have hurricanes. You can imagine government spending. The Great Recession, 2007 to 2009. We always go back to this because we had, Perry and I, we had homes. We had bought like 3 homes, and we had spent and put our money into during this time. And many people lost their homes. We actually had 4, at that time. And we almost through the grace of God, we are able to keep these for a later time and to sell them, and at least to break even with our homes that Perry had built, that we had and that Perry had built. So it was these homes that we built them at a time that was very detrimental, time in history. It was a recession. It was before the recession, right before the recession, that we built these homes. And then to sell them, the price would just go down to like almost nothing when we already put all this money into them. So We suffered during the Great Recession, but praise the Lord, God got us through, and God always provided for us. We never were in need ever. So the Great Recession. Under the Bush administration, the gross domestic product was continued to grow annually by 2.5%. But inflation increased toward the end of Bush's administration. The cost of oil continued to rise in 2008, so the average price of gasoline had surpassed now $4 a gallon. $4 a gallon. Now even it's up to $4 now. We have probably another recession coming. But this is what happened. This is what's stinky right here. The Federal Reserve decided to stimulate the market by lowering interest rates. So the Federal Reserve came in, bumbling around again, and said, okay, let's lower the interest rates. This resulted in a red-hot housing market. All of a sudden, people started buying, triggering a surge in buying real estate with cheap credit. Now they had really cheap credit. As the interest rate was low, they could buy and they wouldn't have to pay back very much interest. And so a housing bubble, they call it a housing bubble, occurred with this new demand and increased real estate values to unrealistic levels. And then they all of a sudden fell. So bam, everything starts falling down. So they have this housing bubble. Like they say, okay, lower interest in the houses. Everybody's buying houses, all these houses, and then with a lower interest, and then all of a sudden this cheap credit's happening. This housing bubble bursts, and then the houses are not worth anything, very much money, and everything goes down, and people are going out of business. People are foreclosing their houses. People that have bought these houses just on and not being able to pay to pay the interest or to pay the banks. They're going into foreclosure by foreclosure. We knew lots of people that lost their homes during this time. Some of our closest friends lost their homes. And like, praise the Lord, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, and we didn't lose any of them because of God being holding us during this time. Now I said we didn't make money, we lost money, but we at least didn't lose the homes and have to declare bankruptcy. Troubled Asset Relief Program called TARP, T-A-R-P. The Great Recession was one of the worst global economic downturns since the Great Depression. So we had a Great Recession, and remember the Great Depression was horrific. And that was in 1930s. So the cost of food and of oil began to rise because of the weakness of the dollar brought on by the Federal Reserve's unwise policies. Again, Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve exacerbated the Great Depression too. So there was an increase in foreclosures and unemployment during this time. The Democratic Party was in control of Congress now. And so President Bush agreed to increase spending at record rates rather than let the market find its own bottom and rebuild on a solid market. So they put together the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP. It was a measure in which the government would buy bad investments from failing companies until the company improved. So what was this? It was a program of the government to purchase toxic assets and equity from financial institutions. Troubled assets. The government would buy back. They were these companies were going bankrupt, and they'd buy the companies, until the company improved. So this was going to cost a lot of taxpayer money, you can imagine. So it was a bomb. The TARP looks like a bomb. It took 10 years for the economy to recover. So probably over 10 years. We're talking about 2017, before it got better. Illegal immigration. So illegal immigration was a concern of the early 2000s. In 2006, an estimated of 4 to 10 million illegal aliens tried to enter the United States. Several Islamic terrorists had already entered, and more of them were entering through our southern border because it wasn't being detected. So they could get in, terrorists could get in quite easily as illegal immigrants. President Bush's attempts to enforce the southern border were criticized. So he signed what's called the Secure Fence Act in 2006. But it did not increase manpower for the Border Patrol. So even though he was building the fence, he didn't have enough manpower to be at the fence. So you'd have a fence all the way through this fence, the Fence Act, but he didn't have Border Patrol there in case they got over the fence somehow. So he failed to secure the United States-Mexican border or finish building a fence along it. So he never finished. It's really weird because now a lot of the Democrats were against building a wall under President Trump now, but and to secure the border. But back then, during the fence, they were behind Bush. So they kind of changed their tune, didn't they? But anyway, so here is the fence. Basically, to know the Secure Fence Act went into 2006, but because they didn't have enough people to control the border, it didn't work that well, and they never really finished the fence. So that's it. So we finished the administration of George W. Bush, and then we're going to go into the next administration, which will be President Obama.